The Red Detachment of Women and the Battle of Algiers are two of the most interesting and influential foreign films of the 1960s, and they both revolve around the same theme, a civilian revolution against an oppressive force. However, while the Red Detachment of Women is very much a propaganda piece, the Battle of Algiers is not. Here's why. Directed by Xie Jing, the Red Detachment of Women's main message is that women can join the revolution as well as the Chinese Communist Party. Within the first hour of the film, we see how well the communist forces treat their copious amount of female soldiers compared to the rich landlords that serve as the film's antagonists. The movie does not hesitate to show the poor conditions the women are in, such as protagonist Wu Qianghua being whipped repeatedly, and her best friend Fu Honglian having been sold off and married to a piece of wood for a decade.
我10岁过门，陪着木头尸首过了整整10年了。
One scene that especially accentuates these points is the introduction of Nan Batian, the film's main villain. Batian and his allies all talk around a table as if they're Bond villains, the way they oppressively talk about the Chinese Communist Party being very over the top as a way to prove the point that they're the evil here.
不过，共产党总是我们的心腹之患，要在他翅膀未硬的时候，就掐死他。
Helping is that his actor, Chen Qiang, was commonly typecast as villains. It's not difficult to see why he'd get these roles. His mannerisms, combined with the costume and set design, get the point across that he's rich, powerful, and most importantly, antagonistic. The main characters are repeatedly amazed by how well the Red Army treats women.
接旗的是个女官吧？
我们这没什么当官的，是连长。
连长。
While it is shown that Batian does not treat women in the same way. One particularly noteworthy aspect of the film is how casually this military life is treated, as if joining a communist revolution is just something women do on their days off. In most army-related films, the military training montages are edited in a fast and intense way, but in the Red Detachment of Women, they're treated like a slow walk in the park. The relaxing opera music used as the scene's soundtrack furthers this point. The biggest indicator of this is the multiple scenes in the movie where Qianghua sings out the praises of the communist ideals. Although in the film this is usually to a group of onlookers, the cinematography focused on both Qianghua and other soldiers in a way to make it seem like she's talking directly to the viewer. The best example of this is the film's last scene.
我们这辈子不够，我们的孩子们接上去。 一直到整个的无产阶级彻底的解放。
Complete with the film's infamous final shot. The fade into the Chinese flag showing that she's become the perfect representation of the country and that the viewer could be next. The Red Detachment of Women is a very well-made film that also has no subtlety, and that's the entire point. To push the views it wants to ingrain into the audience, its motives are shown as bluntly as possible in order to achieve its goal of radicalizing those who watch it. Because of this, the people it pushes as evil are cartoonishly so, and the people seen as good can do no wrong in their actions. Ultimately, it remains a fascinating display in how much China pushed its ideals throughout the early 1960s. Meanwhile, Gilo Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers has very similar elements, but uses them in a different way. The film also takes place within a revolutionary context, but a real one, the Algerian War of Independence, in which the French government occupied Algiers. When the Battle of Algiers was released, the titular battle had taken place less than 10 years before, and the Algerian War of Independence had ended less than 5 years before. Considering the film was made by Algerians, it obviously favors the Algerian people. Helping this is that the Front de Libération Nationale, or FLN, is portrayed in a very similar way as the CCP is in the Red Detachment of Women, with them both being very prominent resistance groups that the antagonistic forces want to take down by any means necessary. Despite this, it is not propaganda. Rather, it serves as a film that celebrates the feats of the Algerian people in order to gain their independence. The proper word to use to describe this film is as nationalism, and although that term has become more controversial within the last few years, it simply means being proud of one's nation. One of the most interesting ways it does this is by making the French look bad, while not entirely demonizing them. The most unique way it distinguishes this is with the soundtrack, done by the legendary Ennio Morricone. One of the more impactful scenes in the movie is when French forces bomb Algerian civilians. A few minutes later, the Algerians do the same to French civilians. Despite what side the viewer is supposed to be on, both scenes use the exact same music, as if to acknowledge their own bloodshed, their own wrongdoings that they caused, resulting in the deaths of the innocent. The problems of the French civilians are treated just as seriously as the problem of the Algerians. Also worth noting is the film's final narration. In a more propagandized piece, the movie would show that the group or country it's trying to promote can do no wrong. Instead, the film depicts what actually happened. The Algerians lost the battle, but would eventually win the war.
2 années de lutte devaient encore passer. Et le 2 juillet 1962, avec l'indépendance, naquit la nation algérienne.
Battle of Algiers serves to retell the story of one of the most important events in the nation's history with as much authenticity and care as possible, to the point where the majority of its actors were either members of the FLN or otherwise active in the war. It shows that even though a nation can be heavily oppressed by another force, it's still capable of doing bad things. It does not aim to promote its country, rather to promote the true story of what happened during that time. Ironically, when the film was first released, it was criticized not for being pro-Algerian propaganda, but for being anti-French propaganda. In the article The Making of the Battle of Algiers, author Irene Bignarni writes that the Battle of Algiers was banned in France for 1 year. When it was finally scheduled, the OAS threatened to place bombs in the movie theaters where the film was on the program, and it was known that the threats were serious. Despite one's opinions on both of these films' unignorable political motives, these shouldn't take away from anyone's enjoyment on the films. With scenes that were very ambitious and ahead of their time, such as both of their battle scenes, they both remain important parts of film history in both their respective countries and the entire world. Understanding their political context helps add a lot to both the Red Detachment of Women and the Battle for Algiers, and what makes them both so similar and yet so different, even if one has an idea it pushes more outwardly than the other.